Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. The first explosion is meant to destroy a building. The second is meant to destroy the instinct to help. In Ukraine, Russian strikes increasingly follow a pattern designed not just to hit a target, but to wait, to observe, and then to strike again precisely when rescuers, medics, police officers, neighbors, and journalists arrive to do what people do after disaster: pull others from the rubble. One of the least visible assumptions of modern warfare is that after the explosion, there is a pause. That once the missile hits, a clock starts counting down towards safety rather than danger. In Ukraine, that assumption no longer holds. Increasingly, the most dangerous moment is not the impact itself, but the aftermath. As we tackle this difficult topic, let's take a look at this next report.
The use of double-tap strikes is not new in Russia's military playbook. Similar tactics were widely reported during Moscow's intervention in Syria. This prompted rescue workers from Damascus to make instructional videos for their Ukrainian counterparts in 2022. In Ukraine, analysts say the logic appears similar: to spread fear, exhaust emergency services, and erode the morale of both civilians and defenders by turning life-saving efforts into lethal risks.
Every time we go out, we put on our vests, because we never know when we're driving somewhere if there is going to be another attack, another missile or whatever.
Under international humanitarian law, double-tap strikes aimed at civilians or first responders represent a clear violation of the principle of distinction, which requires parties to a conflict to differentiate between combatants and non-combatants. Legal experts argue that such attacks strengthen the case that civilians are being intentionally targeted, rather than harmed incidentally during legitimate military operations. Unlike a single strike, which an aggressor may attempt to explain away as an error or intelligence failure, a second, closely timed attack makes such claims far less credible. The deliberate targeting of rescuers and civilian infrastructure following an initial explosion suggests intent, a key element in the prosecution of war crimes. For now, public accountability relies largely on independent documentation and on sustained international attention to a tactic designed not just to kill, but to punish those who try to save lives.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Double-tap strikes happen when a second, sometimes a third munition is launched at the same location after an initial strike, deliberately timed to hit first responders and civilians who arrive to help. The practical effect is simple and brutal. Local residents often reach a strike site before emergency services. They check on neighbors, assess damage, and begin clearing debris. Firefighters, medics, and police then arrive under the assumption that the immediate threat has passed. But the interval between strikes is unpredictable. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes hours. The air raid siren stopping does not mean safety, and this variability is not accidental. On the 10th of April 2024, Chornomorsk was hit twice within an 11-minute gap. 2 years earlier, Dnipro Airport was struck again more than 2 hours after the first missile. The message is consistent. Time itself is weaponized. In some cases, the pattern is even clearer. Zaporizhia, April 2024. One wave of 3 missiles launched minutes apart. Then, 90 minutes later, another wave, this time with a 1-minute interval between strikes. This is sequencing. It requires surveillance and planning. Crucially, the victims of follow-up strikes are overwhelmingly civilians: rescuers, medics, police officers, journalists, and neighbors. For a long time, Russian official sources avoided acknowledging this tactic at all. When a strike was considered successful, it was reported without reference to how that success was achieved. But since mid-2024, something has shifted. Russian military-linked Telegram channels have begun to speak more openly, not as an unfortunate outcome, but as proof of effectiveness. This pattern coincides with personnel changes at the top of Russia's missile and artillery command structure. With their operational backgrounds in Chechnya and Syria, the use of double-tap strikes with missiles, drones, and increasingly artillery has intensified, particularly near front lines and border regions. International reaction has been slow, but it is no longer absent. UN officials, the United States, Canada, and the European Union have all condemned these strikes as violations of international humanitarian law. Attacks on the wounded and those assisting them are explicitly prohibited. What has been missing until now is synthesis. Double tap strikes are often treated as shocking incidents rather than a coherent strategy. This is not about isolated war crimes, it is about a system that measures success not by territory taken, but by how effectively fear spreads beyond the blast radius. The deeper effect is psychological. If rescuers hesitate, more people die. If civilians stop helping one another, social trust erodes. If journalists stay away, visibility disappears. Double tap strikes do not just kill people, they aim to hollow out the space between people where solidarity usually lives. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Anhelina Hrytsei, researcher from Truth Hounds. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
So today we are exploring the tactic of Russian double tapping when it comes to the war in Ukraine, even targeting things like civilian infrastructure as well. But first thing first, do you observe this being a newly deployed tactic, or has it been something that's been going on for a while and only now being more reported?
Thank you for your question. So double tap strikes have definitely been occurring since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We've seen incidents like that already in the winter of 2022, but every year the number of such strikes that we recorded continue to rise. And in 2025, the use of this tactic, according to the available information that we have, has reached its peak. So in 2025 alone, we recorded over 100 incidents that bear the characteristics of double tap strikes. And those characteristics are two. First, the location of the first attack and the second attack has to match. And second, the time interval between the two strikes has to range from several minutes to several hours. And this is the time sufficient for rescue services, emergency personnel like civil defense workers, medics, and the police to arrive at the site of the location and begin their work. So we've definitely seen an increase in this type of incidents over the years, but it's in no way a new tactic.
Right, so like you mentioned, there's a way of tracking these, and we're not just pulling these numbers out. We are seeing a spike and at least an increase in these sort of tactics. But what has changed throughout these couple of years of war, and why is it now being increasingly deployed? Is there any sort of strategic calculus in this?
So it's very difficult to say whether there is a strategic calculus, but we've seen that the use of double tap strikes and against rescue workers and against emergency personnel correlates with the increase in violence against civilians in general in the war in Ukraine, and also in attacks on hospitals, on humanitarian aid workers. So we see this general increase of violence against civilian population and against civilian infrastructure. And there may be many explanations to that. One explanation that we are considering in the report that we are working on at the moment, focusing on double tap strikes as one of the chapters, is that such strikes could have a strategic purpose to demoralize the civilian population, as well as the military, and to in this way, make the prospect of, for instance, concessions or negotiations more attractive to the general population. But this is just one of the hypotheses. But it is very important to consider that the impact that double tap strikes as a tactic could have on the civilian population and could have on the resilience of local communities. Because what we've seen is the geographic concentration of such strikes, specifically in the frontline areas of Ukraine. And we're talking about a very wide geographical span. because we've seen double tap strikes both in the eastern Ukraine, in, for instance, the Donetsk Oblast, but also in the south and in the north. And in such locations, double tap strikes happen on a regular basis. And for the civilian population, it means that in case of an emergency, in case of a shelling, for instance, of a residential building, there is a high likelihood that the emergency services will not come. And this causes a certain expectation, a fear that when the help is needed, it will not be able to come, because personal safety of rescue workers is also important. And in some areas, due to the very frequent use of these tactics, they are not able to come and help people.
Right. When you're describing the strikes, when it comes to the mechanics of it, there seems to be a delay of somewhere between a minute to even hours. How are these kind of being calculated by the Russians' part? Is there a specific rhyme or reason to a certain delay, or is it more of a capability issue?
We argue that when it comes to double tap striking as a tactic, the delay is influenced by several facts. So there is double tap striking should be distinguished from just exerting two consecutive strikes on a particular location, because when two consecutive strikes are executed, this could be a legitimate military tactic, but the delay is not present, so it could be a minute or two. So this time is insufficient for the emergency services to arrive. But if we, for instance, are talking about double tap strikes and we are talking about time calculations there, we argue that the pause from 10 minutes, that is how we are calculating such attacks, to several hours is the time sufficient so you can be aware that the emergency services are likely there and are likely performing their functions. And in this regard, it is also very important to consider the type of weapons that are used, because we've also seen Russian military use drones equipped with cameras for surveillance purposes before striking a particular location. So not only can the military estimate that this time was sufficient for emergency services to arrive and begin their work, but they also use cameras to confirm that rescuers, medics are indeed there. And it is easy to confirm because for instance, fire trucks that arrive at the location, they are of red color, they have very visible insignia, and the rescuers themselves wear very easily identifiable uniforms. So this special delay and the use of drones to confirm the arrival of rescue workers is what makes this tactic especially brutal and bearing characteristics of intentional targeting of emergency personnel in particular.
Do you think there's anything on the Ukrainian air defense part that could help mitigate some of these strikes, seeing that if it becomes a pattern or something more predictable, that a second strike will come after a delay? Is there any way on the Ukraine's part to be able to intercept at least some of these attacks?
So the pattern has already become quite regular and quite predictable. Since we've seen the strikes since 2022, for instance, civil defense personnel has already adapted to the threat and has included precautions in their safety protocols. So, for instance, if we talk about the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, whose rescuers are usually the first to come to location who help to clear the rubble, extinguish fires, it is now mandatory for many of them, especially those working in the frontline areas where such attacks are most frequent, to wear armored vests, to always have medical kits on them, and this is to also wear helmets to protect themselves. So this has become the protocol, and this is also something that complicates rescue work, because if in peaceful times the equipment of an average rescuer weighted 10 kilograms, now because of this additional protection measures, because of armored vests, it weighs 30 kilograms, which makes the work extremely hard. Also, it is now established protocol that at the site of a particular strike where the rescuers are working, a separate person is assigned to monitor the skies. And if there is a threat, for instance, you can identify it visually or using, if we are talking about drones, using drone detectors or using your hearing, you can hear that there is a drone approaching. There is this one person responsible for informing the rest of the team members that this is the time to hide. This is the time to move to the shelters. So this is another kind of adaptation. Of course, there are others, but these are the most important ones. And if the information about the possibility of a repeat attack becomes available before the emergency services arrive, they might need to delay their operations for some time before coming to a location. And this is also something that greatly impacts the people affected by the strike, because the delay in the ability to provide emergency services might lead to the decrease in the chances of those who are injured or wounded in receiving their necessary help and in preserving their life and health.
All right, and how does that impact the civilians psychologically?
So it has a great impact on civilians in the psychological realm as well, because when you, for instance, when your house is targeted by an artillery shelling or by a drone, and there is a fire or you are trapped under the rubble, knowing that double tap striking is a common tactic, knowing that emergency services may not be able to arrive, may create this sense of anxiety and this sense of fear that when the help is especially crucial, you will not be able to receive it. And it does not impact only the psychological well-being of civilians, which is the most obvious implication. It also affects the psychological well-being of rescuers, because we've talked to a co-founder of a organization called Brave Minds, which specializes in psychological support for the state emergency service personnel. And she mentioned that because of double tap strikes and because of their higher likelihood, many rescuers are now very insecure, very cautious, and very anxious before going to work, because they are afraid that they might be deliberately targeted. And many of them have also experienced trauma related to losing their colleagues due to such strikes. So the psychological impact goes well beyond just impact on civilian well-being. It also affects rescuers and the ability to provide rescue services in the areas which are most vulnerable to such attacks.
All right, definitely another brutal page in Russia's war against Ukraine. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us understand this topic a little more. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Reports from Russian military bloggers suggest a sudden disruption to Starlink satellite internet across the Ukrainian front line. Ukrainian forces rely heavily on the technology for communications and battlefield networking, and for now, it seems that they will not be sharing this bandwidth.
Russian pro-war bloggers have reported a broad outage of Starlink satellite terminals along the Ukrainian front, claiming that connections used by units on both sides have gone dark. According to these accounts, at least 9 military bloggers close to the Russian armed forces say the loss of service could hinder coordination and drone operations, noting that Moscow lacks a homegrown alternative for high-reliability satellite internet. SpaceX, the operator of the Starlink network, and Ukrainian officials have indicated the outage comes comes after measures to block unauthorized usage in Ukraine, including a registration whitelist, which may have cut off Russian access.
A German intelligence assessment reveals Russia's defense spending may be far higher than Kremlin figures suggest. The study points to extensive underreporting and budget reclassification that obscures the real scale of Moscow's military outlays.
The estimate suggests that Russia's actual military expenditure reached roughly 250 billion euros in the latest fiscal year, so about two-thirds more than Moscow officially reported. The intelligence agency found that a range of defense-related costs, from construction and military IT programs to social payments for soldiers' families, were deliberately recorded under civilian budget lines to mask the scale of spending. At about 10% of GDP, Russia's military spending now far exceeds NATO's 2 or even 5% guideline, reflecting the financial intensity of its operations in Ukraine and broader rearmament efforts near NATO's eastern borders.
Armenia is signaling a possible preference for U.S. nuclear technology as it considers replacing its aging Soviet-era plant. Officials stress that a final decision is pending, but Washington's modular reactor designs are drawing particular attention.
Armenian government officials have indicated that they may favor an American modular nuclear reactor to replace the aging Metsamor nuclear power plant, highlighting the United States' strengths in modular technology. As U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance prepares to visit Yerevan, Armenia's infrastructure minister noted that proposals from U.S., Russian, and Chinese firms are under consideration, though modular designs preferred by Armenian planners align with U.S. industry offerings. Metsamor, which supplies about 40% of Armenia's electricity and dates to the 1970s, faces safety concerns and nearing end-of-life status.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.